well, I look forward to the outcome of the January review and that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. I should indicate to officials that now I think we'll have quite a bracket in relation to matters Israel and the Middle East and Palestine. And as officials come forward, question on notice, number 7 from myself. I asked for a copy of the letter that the former Foreign Minister, Ms Bishop, had written in relation to her concerns about monies being diverted, and I was rightly told that it's not the practice to publish the letters. Accept that, raise the white flag on that, but can I ask, have we had a response to Minister Bishop's letter?
Senator, while my colleagues are preparing to answer, could I just indicate to the committee that we will now table, in fact we've just given to the Secretariat, the list of the 47 member states on the Human Rights Council.
Thank you very much. Ms Yu.
Yes, HKU, First Assistant Secretary of the Middle East and Africa Division. Yes, there was a response to the former Foreign Minister's letter to the PA Authority.
Are you at liberty to disclose its content?
I would probably suggest the same applies to the extent that this was a diplomatic exchange.
Right, well, we were told as much that Ms Bishop's letter was an expression of concern, without telling me the exact response. Was it just a complete denial, a middle finger salute? You know, what was the response in general terms?
I think it's fair to say that given the former Foreign Minister's decision, there wasn't enough assurance provided in the letter that...
So can I... Sure. Sorry to interrupt, but to truncate this, in other words, the Minister sent a letter, we got a response, after which the Minister made the decision. So that response came before the Minister made her decision in relation to funding.
That's correct.
All right, look, that's all I need to know, and thank you for that. Budget estimates number 8, question on notice. I'd asked in relation to the fund for the families of martyrs, to the best of our understanding of that fund, would the families that lost family members during the demonstrations of which I was talking about be able to draw on the fund? And then I was told the Palestinian Authority has advised that the Palestinian Liberation Organisation provides financial support to convicted prisoners, detainees and their families without reference to the motivation behind the alleged or proven crimes. So do we just accept what the Palestinian Authority tell us? Because one assumes that if there are Palestinians in prison in the area controlled by the Palestinian Authority, convicted prisoners would not be benefiting from such a fund. Further, if a Palestinian was in jail, let's say in Israel, for fraud, they wouldn't be the beneficiary of such a fund, would they?
We will have to clarify that with the Palestinian Authority. Yes, if you could, because the assertion
that they provide financial support to convicted prisoners without reference to the motivation, I find that a bit hard to believe, especially when in their budget they have a specific, as I understand it, a martyr fund, or which suggests that there has to be a motivation behind their death or imprisonment. So if you could take further details, or provide further details in relation to that, that would be helpful. I also asked in that same question in relation to Egypt that they also severely restrict entry to and from Gaza, and the answer that was provided was that Egypt manages its border crossing point in accordance with its own assessment of its security concerns. Yes. Fine, but would it be fair to say that they share similar security concerns to Israel, and therefore they have quite severe restrictions as well as on movements? Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, I think that's fair to say.
All right.
But it also notes that recent reporting indicates the border crossing was kept open between Egypt and the Gaza.
All right, thank you. Then can I ask, what are the details of DFAT's recent efforts to solve problems in terrorism financing, risk management in its Palestinian aid program? So where are we at with everything? We've got UNRWA, we've got the AFIDA, what else?
Senator, perhaps...
Who can take me through them one by one? UNRWA first.
No, I don't need to.
Or Ms. Yu, are you able to help on another area?
I can perhaps go through the steps that we take, Senator, with regard to our program to the PT more generally. And then, as you know, a feeder case is under audit. So I'll ask my colleague, Ms. Anderson, to go through that.
Thank you.
So with regard to our programs to the PT, we recognise that this is an area where we are subject to greater risks. So the program that we have in place and the framework that we have in place ensures that there is real rigorous risk management and due diligence. So perhaps if I can just run you through the steps that we take in delivering these aid programs, would that be useful to you, Senator?
Well, can I ask, is there actual local oversight in relation to it? Like, for example, in the past we have been told about how wonderful things are with our provision of funding for education, only to find out that the books that the young children are given are telling them to hate Jews basically from a very early primary school age. Well, you know, when you tell me and the Australian taxpayer that we're giving money for education, people that say big tick, that is great, only to be severely disappointed that nobody checked on what was actually produced under the education, in inverted commas, heading, which allowed for books that I think Senator Leyonhjelm has canvassed in some detail in previous estimates.
Senator, I can certainly confirm that there is on-the-ground check. In fact, I myself was actually in the Palestinian territories recently, engaging in some of these conversations with the director of the UNRWA operations. And there, for example, I specifically raised questions around textbooks. And as you know, Senator, UNRWA is required to adopt the textbook of the country in which they operate because the students are subject to the country's educational system and testing. This particular director, Scott Anderson, himself spoke to me quite frankly about how some of the textbooks that they are using, they recognise that around 2% of the content could be regarded as quite controversial, and in order to address that, well, it is controversial.
Thank you. It is controversial.
In order to address that, UNRWA puts in place complementary material to try and neutralise that content, take their teachers through rigorous training to talk about how these things should be delivered in the most neutral way.
And how successful is that?
Well, I think students are being educated, and a lot of these Palestinians are in great need of quality basic services, including education. And as we all know, UNRWA...
How do these books then slip through if there are people on the ground vetting everything? Because, you know, irrespective of where the money comes from, be it Europe or England or whatever, one imagines that that sort of content in textbooks would not be acceptable.
As I indicated, these textbooks are textbooks of the country that they're actually operating in, thereby being developed by the Palestinian Authority in this case.
Yeah, but with whose money? Sure, the books are being developed in the Palestinian territory by the Palestinians for the Palestinians, but the fundamental question is, with whose money is this happening? And if it's with our money, I think the Australian taxpayer wants an assurance that that money is not being put to the sort of use that has been exposed previously by my colleague, Senator Leyonhjelm.
Well, as to whose money, I'll have to take that on notice, but because I'm not sure whether it's the PA that prints them or whether it's UNRWA. But coming back to UNRWA's use of these textbooks, you might be pleased to hear that in April 2018, the UK announced it would be conducting a review of Palestinian textbooks, and we have indicated to the UK our interest in taking part in that. So those discussions are underway. Previously, I think I mentioned...
Sorry, when do we anticipate that review to be completed? Because I would have thought it wouldn't take too long to grab a textbook or half a dozen and go through them. We were told about this review, if I recall correctly, at last estimates. Yes. And so here we are, about 5 months later. I reckon I could even read 5 textbooks within that time.
Senator, we have been chasing up this particular issue with the UK colleagues, so hopefully I'll be able to provide more concrete response to you this time.
Senator Leyonhjelm.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that, Monsieur, I'm just wondering if you are aware of recent media reports that would indicate the City of Jerusalem is proposing to take over the educational functions previously undertaken by UNRWA within Jerusalem for the reasons that I raised at last estimates and Senator Abetz has just referred to. Are you aware of that?
I'm not, Senator, so once again, it would be really useful if I could actually have a look at what you're referring to.
And the reason is, as we have discussed, there's a newspaper article from the Times of Israel which quotes a person by the name of Bassam Eid, who's said to be a human rights activist, who's been studying UNRWA's schools and institutions for years, and there's quite a lengthy quote from him, but he refers to, or he says, he's quoted as saying, "I've worked in several UNRWA schools in the territories and in Jordan, and children aged 9 to 10 want to be killed and kill Jews and to release their people. Who taught you that?" I asked. They said that was what they were learning in schools, and I asked teachers at UNRWA schools in Jordan if children were taught to blow themselves up and be killed. They said, of course, how else will they liberate the land from the Israeli occupation? UNRWA is aware of this, and the international community knows that all UNRWA studies are full of hate and incitement. The international community continues to inject funds because it is against Israel. Now, this was written in the context of this media article reporting that the Mayor of Jerusalem has joined the several other organisations raising concerns about this, and they're doing something practical about it by taking over the education, all the education within the Jerusalem area. I'm wondering if, in light of that, assuming that goes ahead and that media report is accurate, if UNRWA is required to do less education because the municipality of Jerusalem is doing more, whether in fact we may review our own contribution to UNRWA.
Well, I wasn't aware of that report, Senator, so thank you for bringing that to my attention. I guess with regard to UNRWA's role, as you know, they're providing service for 5.4 million Palestinian refugees in both the PT area, but also Jordan, Lebanon and Syria. They're providing really, as I said previously, basic quality services for Palestinians in need.
Yep, they are. We have discussed that. As a result of the previous foreign minister's decision in relation to funding. I wasn't quite sure when you were answering Senator Wong's questions whether there has actually been a net reduction in funding to go to the PT, or it's just been reallocated since the Marne Development Centre or a feeder are no longer being funded.
There's been a slight reduction from 43.8 million to 43 million, Senator.
Okay. So 0.8 of a million. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that still leaves a 4-year agreement with UNRWA of 10 million, but 5 million of that was brought forward to the current financial year, so it now makes it 15 million, was that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I just want to draw to your attention also some information and ask if you're aware of it. The Mayor of Jerusalem is again reported in Israeli media briefing a committee of the Knesset in which he showed a school textbook used by UNRWA in East Jerusalem, and it refers specifically to Dalal Mughrabi, a terrorist, a Palestinian terrorist who murdered 35 civilians in a bus attack in Herlitzia. So this is being distributed in UNRWA schools, and this is one of the pieces of information that he presented to this Knesset committee, and is one of the reasons why the Jerusalem municipality is taking over the education of Palestinian children in the municipality area. Are you familiar with that claim?
Sorry, Senator, I was not familiar with that claim.
All right. Clearly, I think that Australian taxpayers would be worried if their funds were being used to publish textbooks which promote the glorification of suicide bombers and terrorists like that. Do you agree?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So that if you made inquiries and confirmed that what the Mayor of Jerusalem has told this Knesset committee is accurate, would I be safe in assuming that there would be a review of the funding that goes towards that?
Senator, I mean, that's a matter for government, but as I explained previously, Australia wants to actively get involved in reviewing the textbooks with the UK colleagues, and so we have been pursuing that with the UK. And there has been other reviews done around textbooks, as I think I stated previously, where it was actually carried out by independent group and funded by the US. I think Senator Abetz asked, who actually carried out the review, and we provided that response on notice. Yeah. And as I said, my own discussion with UNRWA providers, service providers, indicate that they are extremely aware of these sensitivities, and that neutrality is a principle that they very, very closely and strongly adhere to. And they have systems in place where they talk to the teachers about how some of this material provided by the Palestinian Authority can be neutralised in their teachings.
Yes, all right. Well, we now have the American administration has withdrawn funding from UNRWA, as you confirmed recently. I understand a parliamentary committee of the EU is also reviewing funding of UNRWA. Are you familiar with that?
No, I wasn't aware of that, Senator.
Okay.
EU has certainly been a very strong sponsor of UNRWA in the past.
You're quite right, they have indeed. But I understand there is some growing sensitivity around what the funds are being used for, and I am informed that there is a review underway as to the use of the EU's funds by UNRWA. We now have the Mayor of Jerusalem raising quite specific accusations in relation to what the money is being used for in UNRWA schools. I'm wondering, Minister, is this a matter of interest to the government in terms of what's being done with Australian taxpayers' money?
Senator, the government has taken a number of decisions recently, preceding my taking up of this role, as you would be aware, in relation to concerns across a range of issues, but broadly speaking, of the nature that you have raised. And yes, we would continue to want to monitor those sorts of issues. You've raised a number of matters today that officials have not been aware of. They will now be examined.
Okay, and all right, can I confirm then, I'm more than happy to feed the information to the most useful place in this issue. Is that you, Miss Yu, or is there somebody else?
No,
that's you. All right.
But through my office, Senator, we will facilitate that.
Through your office?
Yes.
All right, okay. As you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Leyonhjelm. So do we have Australian officials actually on the ground ensuring that the funding that we either provide directly or through NGOs is being used appropriately? We've had the World Vision situation, we've had the AFIDA situation, and I'm just wondering, do we actually have on the ground people that we employ, so we don't have to rely on the Palestinian Authority telling us something, or a UN official telling us something, or an NGO, which sadly now we know are not as reliable as we might want them to be?
I can say yes, Senator, we do.
Good. Thank you. Now, Ms Anderson, do you want to take me through what we are doing with AFIDA, please?
Thank you, Senator. Megan Anderson, Acting First Assistant Secretary, Humanitarian NGOs and Partnerships Division. I should, I guess, clarify that we have a range of activities, as you said, in that part of the world, and we take the issues around countering terrorism financing extremely seriously. They are clearly outlined in all of our contracts and grants, including with NGOs, but not limited to NGOs. Should also take this opportunity to, for the record, note that there have been allegations with regard to employees of one of AFIDA's downstream partners, but those allegations have not related to the transfer of Australian aid funds. Mm-hmm. In terms of specific arrangements in place on the ground, and Ms Yu has mentioned that, under the Amenka 3 program, which is part of our bilateral aid activity, we do have very regular checks. Clearly this is an environment that is more of a high-risk environment than perhaps some others. We have a 6-monthly process where our partners are required to report against their assessments. They do checks against consolidated list and against our sanctions list. In addition, our post on the ground does do spot checks on a 2-weekly basis in the case of Amenka 3. In the case of our broader NGO activities as well, members of my team visit the field and do monitoring visits against a range of different checks, not only limited to counter-terrorism, but including those kinds of aspects. From time to time as well, we also have a process of, and I believe Ms Yu may be able to speak more to this, have engaged local auditors to be able to go in and do additional checks on the flows of our finances. As you're aware, there is a current investigation underway, very detailed investigation with regard to the allegations made.
And how long do we think that will continue on for before we have some finality?
Senator, as you know, it's a very complicated process. We have engaged an independent auditor to undertake that process, an experienced organisation who does have a field presence as well. And
From Australia?
Sorry?
From Australia. Are you able to name the independent auditor?
Deloitte is undertaking the audit.
Right. Thank you.
So obviously they have presence in Australia. They also have a presence in the Middle East. They are continuing to undertake that process, which has included field work in the Middle East, and they're preparing their response at the moment.
Is somebody able to assist me as to why the Palestinian population seems to attract one of the highest amounts of aid per capita in the world, if not the highest, as I understand it, at the very top level in comparison to other populations that some might say might be in need of greater assistance. Do you want to take that on notice? It's
Senator, I think it obviously goes to some of the issues that we've been talking about in the committee for some time, including history obviously plays a role, and you are very well informed about the history of it, the particular circumstances of the Palestinian people at the moment, and also a desire, I think, on the part of donors to ensure that when it comes to this elusive Middle East peace process, that contributions are able to be made towards that end. But I think, these things are much debated. There are a wide variety of views, and from all accounts, the situation that many of those recipients are in continues to be quite dire.
Does the department seek to align its support with the Palestinian Authority's objectives? So the support we give to them, do we say that we do that because we support the Palestinian Authority's objectives?
Senator, of course not. Our program is based on our own objectives that we want to achieve. So we have a program investment plan in place that clearly states the objectives that we want to achieve with regard to our aid to the PT.
Can you confirm that the Palestinian Authority announced on March the 5th that it would increase payments under these programs for terrorism, if I can use that term, from $350 million in 2017 to $403 million in 2018?
I'll have to take that on notice.
Which is a substantial increase, and so what's the word? Fungibility. It just seems that the Palestinian Authority, whilst always crying poor to the world, just always seems to be able to up the amount of money that it makes available to its martyr funds, and that is a matter that has exercised my mind for a while, and that's why I've been raising it at these estimates for a while, and previously as well, whilst we were in opposition with Minister Carr at the time, who sought to sort of high-handedly dismiss these concerns, which sadly are now all coming to light. But if you could take that on notice, that'd be good. And if you can then advise whether in 2017 the amount being paid to terrorists and their families and the Martyr Fund, etc., equated to about 50% of the foreign aid that the Palestinian Authority receives. Take that on notice and let me know, please.
Sure.
Or I assume you don't have that figure.
No, I do not.
Yep,
Thank you.
And I understand that a convicted terrorist in prison can receive 12,000 shekels per month plus bonuses of 300 shekels per wife, 50 shekels per child, and extra for being resident in Israel and Jerusalem. This can amount to about $3,500 per month. By contrast, coming back to education, a teacher employed by the Palestinian Authority receives roughly $615 per month. So I think we can see how the Palestinian Authority has priorities, and we give them money to pay their teachers a pittance, and they just shovel their money elsewhere. Are you aware of a recent poll of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which found that 95.5% of people believe that there is corruption with the government of the Palestinian Authority?
I wasn't aware, Senator.
And Are you aware of the independent Palestinian firm, is it AWRAD, A-W-R-A-D, that a survey of 1,200 people conducted by the independent Palestinian firm, AWRAD, all capital letters, also found that 82% of Gazans believe the same about Hamas. So if you could have a look at that for me, I would be much obliged.
Will do, Senator.
Yeah, can I get onto this issue of, the Palestinian question and the support that is provided? Is it correct that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which helps more than 65 million forcibly displaced people in myriad conflict zones from Congo to Myanmar, employs 10,966 workers, which is less than 1/3 of UNRWA's workforce, which means that the UN's personnel commitment for Palestinian refugees is about 30 times higher than its level for the rest of the world's refugees.
I'll have to check that,
If you could, and not only check those figures, they may well be wrong, but it's from a reputable publication, but if you could check that for me, and then how does the United Nations justify this? And if you could then take on notice, if this is the case, what representations will we make to the United Nations about its lopsidedness in support of the plight of refugees around the world? Now, I think I canvassed this last time, but once a refugee comes to Australia and gains citizenship, they're no longer deemed to be refugees. Is that a refugee? Is that correct?
Once they're a citizen, yes, that's correct under Australian.
Now, we do have, do we not, a number of Palestinians that are citizens, as I understand it, in Israel, in Syria, in Jordan, and yet they are deemed, like no other refugee population, as refugees. And even if they are citizens, let's say in Jordan, they're seen as refugees, and then if they have children, their children and offspring are seen as refugees, and therefore the Palestinian refugee population is continually growing. Now, this is a rort, I would have thought, that needs to be brought into line with standards, or otherwise we're saying there are people who are refugees and then there are Palestinians that are refugees that are deserving of a lot better treatment.
Chair, as you said, the government of Jordan does enable Palestinian refugees to secure Jordanian citizenship while retaining their Palestinian refugee status according to their law. And as you know, the definition of refugees under the UNRWA's operation was put in place by the UN General Assembly.
Is this something, Minister, that Australia supports? Do you know this definition by the United Nations?
Senator, it's not previously been drawn to my attention.
Right. Sorry, it hasn't been? No. Well, don't want to embarrass you or anybody else. One assumes that...
I just seek some advice on it.
Yeah, it just seems one assumes that this has been going on under Liberal Labor governments for, well, ever since, for the last 5, 6 something decades?
Some decades, yes.
Sorry?
Yes, that's correct, Senator.
Yeah, so some sort of justification, and whether it is worthy potentially of review, given the situation of the disproportionate amount of support that seems to be going in the Palestinian way in relation to funds, percentage or funds per capita, and also the staff made available. That would be very helpful. Now, Ms Anderson, I think you've answered